In the darkness of a freezing January night in Massachusetts, a Boston police officer's body was discovered in the snow. What followed would become one of America's most controversial murder trials, a case that has divided communities, sparked nationwide protests, and raised disturbing questions about police corruption. Was it a tragic accident? A cold-blooded murder? Or something far more sinister, a calculated cover-up orchestrated by the very people sworn to uphold justice? This is the story of Karen Reed and the death of John O'Keefe, a case where nothing is as straightforward as it first appears. Dawn broke over Canton, Massachusetts on January 29, 2022. The quiet suburban neighborhood awakened to flashing police lights and the grim discovery of Boston police officer John O'Keefe lying face-up in the snow outside a fellow officer's home. His body was frozen, his face battered with multiple injuries. The temperature had dropped to below freezing that night, a detail that would become critically important in determining the timeline of O'Keefe's death. The medical examiner would later confirm that hypothermia had contributed significantly to his death as he lay exposed to the elements. The person who found him? His girlfriend, Karen Reed, who had been desperately searching for him throughout the night. According to witness statements, Reed appeared genuinely distraught upon discovering O'Keefe's body, immediately calling 911 and attempting to revive him despite the obvious signs that he had been deceased for some time. But as investigators arrived at the scene, a crucial question emerged: was Karen Reed discovering her boyfriend's body, or returning to the scene of her own crime? This question would form the cornerstone of one of the most divisive criminal cases in recent Massachusetts history. Before their names became entangled in headlines across America, Karen Reed and John O'Keefe led ordinary lives. Reed, 45, was a respected finance professor at Bentley University with no criminal history. With a PhD in finance and years of teaching experience, she had built a solid professional reputation. Students described her as thorough, knowledgeable, and fair, hardly the profile of someone capable of a violent crime. O'Keefe, 46, had served 16 years with the Boston Police Department, earning the respect of his colleagues. Known for his professionalism and dedication to the job, fellow officers would later testify to his good character and commitment to public service. Their relationship had been going strong for about 2 years without any reported incidents of violence or domestic issues. But O'Keefe wasn't just a dedicated officer. After tragic circumstances took the lives of his sister and brother-in-law in quick succession, 2013 to 2014, he stepped up to become guardian to their children, a devoted uncle who took on the responsibility of raising his orphaned niece and nephew. Friends described how he had transformed his bachelor lifestyle overnight to provide stability for these children who had already experienced tremendous loss. These were not people anyone would expect to be at the center of a murder investigation. Yet one night would change everything. What truly happened on the night of January 28 to 29, 2022? Here's what we know for certain. Karen Reed and John O'Keefe had been drinking at local bars in Canton with friends. Surveillance footage would later confirm their presence at several establishments, including C.F. McCarthy's and Waterfall Bar and Grill. Witnesses would testify about the couple's behavior, with some suggesting they appeared to be having a good time while others noted signs of tension. Shortly after midnight, they drove in Reed's black Lexus SUV to the home of Brian Albert, another Boston police officer who was hosting a gathering that night. Several off-duty police officers were present at this gathering, a fact that would later fuel conspiracy theories about the case. O'Keefe got out of the vehicle near Albert's home on Fairview Road. And here is where two completely different versions of events begin. According to prosecutors, a heavily intoxicated Karen Reed argued with O'Keefe, struck him with her SUV while reversing, and fled the scene, leaving him to die alone in the freezing cold. They claimed she hit him at 24.2 miles per hour and dragged him for 62.5 feet before abandoning him. Cell phone records showed that Reed made several calls and sent texts to O'Keefe's phone in the hours after allegedly leaving him, which prosecutors characterized as attempts to create an alibi. But the defense tells a radically different story. O'Keefe entered the house where something horrible occurred, potentially including a beating and a dog attack, that resulted in his death. They allege his body was then moved outside to frame Reed for the crime. Defense attorneys pointed to the specific nature of O'Keefe's injuries, which they argued were inconsistent with being struck by a vehicle but aligned perfectly with alternative explanations that implicated others at the gathering. Early that morning, Reed and two friends found O'Keefe's lifeless body in the front yard. The question that would haunt this case: was she truly discovering her boyfriend's fate, or was this all an elaborate act? The medical examiner determined O'Keefe suffered multiple skull fractures from blunt force trauma. His body showed two swollen black eyes and abrasions on his right arm. The freezing temperatures contributed to his death as hypothermia set in while he lay in the snow. A closer examination of the autopsy report revealed additional details that would become central to the case. The pattern of injuries, including defensive wounds on his arms and the specific locations of the head trauma, became hotly contested evidence. Experts from both sides would offer contradictory interpretations of the same medical findings. 3 days after the discovery, authorities arrested Karen Reed on manslaughter charges. By June 2022, a grand jury had escalated those charges to include second-degree murder. But Reed's defense team, led by prominent attorneys Alan Jackson and David Yannetti, presented compelling alternative theories that suggested a massive police conspiracy. O'Keefe's injuries, they argued, appeared more consistent with a beating than a vehicle strike. A fresh cut on O'Keefe's arm contained a fragment of blue glass, which didn't match Reed's taillight. Evidence suggested a German Shepherd at the Albert home could explain some injuries. Suspicious text messages existed between witnesses. No vehicle tracks were found in the snow where O'Keefe was allegedly hit. The crime scene appeared improperly preserved with potentially contaminated evidence. Forensic experts called by the defense testified that the pattern of injuries on O'Keefe's body was inconsistent with being struck by a vehicle in the manner described by prosecutors. They pointed particularly to the lack of typical lower extremity injuries common in pedestrian vehicle accidents and the specific pattern of head trauma that suggested repeated impacts rather than a single collision. Were these legitimate concerns pointing to a flawed investigation, or desperate attempts to create reasonable doubt about Reed's guilt? In April 2023, Massachusetts blogger, Turtleboy, Aidan Kearney published the first in what would become over 500 articles about the case, titled, Canton Cover-Up Part 1. His work alleged Red was being framed by a network of police protecting their own. Kearney's blog posts gained tremendous traction on social media platforms, where millions of views and shares helped transform what had been a local Massachusetts case into a national conversation about police accountability. His investigation uncovered connections between various parties involved in the case that raised legitimate questions about conflicts of interest in the investigation. The response from authorities was swift. Norfolk County District Attorney Michael Morrissey released a video statement condemning the conspiracy theories. Innuendo is not evidence. False narratives are not evidence. He emphasized that 11 witnesses stated O'Keefe never entered Albert's home that night. Local media outlets found themselves caught between reporting objective facts and navigating the intense public interest fueled by social media coverage. Traditional news organizations struggled to maintain journalistic standards while competing with the viral spread of alternative narratives about the case. The controversy intensified when Kearney himself was charged with witness intimidation related to the case, eventually facing 16 counts, though he maintained his innocence throughout. His supporters viewed these charges as further evidence of a system attempting to silence those who questioned the official narrative. By April 2024, the Free Karen Red movement had grown so powerful that courts established a 200-foot buffer zone around the courthouse to manage the massive protests anticipated for the trial. Supporters wore distinctive T-shirts and carried signs proclaiming Reed's innocence, while counter-protesters maintained a smaller but equally passionate presence supporting the prosecution's case. This wasn't just a murder case anymore, it had become a nationwide referendum on police corruption and the justice system itself. Opening statements began April 29, 2024. The prosecution presented witnesses testifying about Reed's intoxication and damage to her vehicle. But the trial would soon take unexpected turns that no one anticipated. On June 3, state police testified about finding pieces of broken taillight at the scene, evidence the defense immediately suggested was planted. Defense cross-examination revealed troubling inconsistencies in how this critical evidence was collected, documented, and preserved, calling into question the entire chain of custody. Then came the testimony that would rock the entire case. On June 10, lead investigator Massachusetts State Police Trooper Michael Proctor admitted under oath that he had sent deeply offensive texts about Red, calling her a whack job C*NT, mocking her medical issues, and commenting to co-workers that he found no nudes while searching her phone for evidence. This stunning revelation of investigator bias shifted the entire tenor of the trial. Jurors visibly reacted to Proctor's testimony, and media coverage exploded with new questions about the integrity of the entire investigation. If the lead investigator harbored such obvious prejudice against the defendant, what other corners might have been cut in building the case? After 8 weeks of explosive testimony, the case went to the jury. In closing arguments, prosecutors insisted Reed killed O'Keefe by backing into him while intoxicated after an argument. The defense countered with their theory that off-duty police inside the Canton home killed O'Keefe and orchestrated an elaborate frame job. Ladies and gentlemen, there was a cover-up in this case, plain and simple, defense attorney Alan Jackson told jurors. You'll surely say to yourself, I don't want to believe it, I don't want to believe that could happen in our community, but sadly over these past 8 weeks you've seen it right before your eyes. After multiple notes reporting they could not reach consensus, one stating they were deeply divided by fundamental differences in opinions and state of mind, the judge declared a mistrial on July 2, 2024. That same day, Trooper Proctor was relieved of duty. The legal battle continued with Reed's team arguing double jeopardy, claiming jurors had unanimously found her not guilty of murder and leaving the scene but had deadlocked only on vehicular manslaughter. Prosecutors disagreed, and on August 23, Judge Cannoni rejected the defense's attempt to dismiss 2 of the charges. Legal experts weighed in on both sides of the double jeopardy argument. Some noted that the jury's inability to reach a verdict technically means no legal decision was made, while others pointed to specific jury communications that suggested they had indeed reached consensus on some charges but not others. Meanwhile, the case gained even more national attention. Vanity Fair published an extensive interview with Red. Investigation Discovery released a 5-part documentary series examining every angle of the case. Massachusetts State Police officially fired Trooper Proctor for violating department policies, including his vulgar text messages about Red. The media coverage revealed deep divides not just in public opinion but in how different news outlets framed the story. Some focused heavily on Reed's actions that night, particularly her blood alcohol level and decision to drive. Others emphasized the troubling inconsistencies in the investigation and the apparent conflicts of interest among those involved. Jury selection for Karen Reed's second trial began April 1, 2025, with opening statements on April 22. Special Prosecutor Hank Brennan, previously known for defending notorious mob boss Whitey Bulger, took a different approach than the previous prosecution team, focusing more on physical evidence and less on Reed's character. The defense doubled down on their framing theory, presenting evidence suggesting O'Keefe's death occurred inside the Albert home and that his body was moved outside specifically to implicate Red. As with the first trial, passionate supporters of both Reed and O'Keefe gathered outside the courthouse daily, with media from across the nation covering every development in real time. The Karen Reed case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our justice system. Could connections between law enforcement officers have influenced this investigation? Has the legendary Blue Wall of Silence protected police potentially involved in O'Keefe's death? When officers investigate other officers, or in this case, people connected to officers, can we trust that professional relationships won't impact the pursuit of truth? The case raises profound questions about who polices the police and how accountability functions within law enforcement communities. Is it even possible to conduct a fair trial under such intense media scrutiny and polarized public opinion? In an age of viral social media content and 24/7 news coverage, can 12 jurors truly set aside everything they've heard and focus solely on evidence presented in court? The mistrial suggests this challenge may be insurmountable in high-profile cases that capture public imagination. Did investigators develop tunnel vision, focusing exclusively on Reed while overlooking other explanations for the tragedy. Cognitive bias in criminal investigations has been well documented by researchers. Once investigators settle on a theory, they often unconsciously seek evidence that confirms their suspicions while dismissing contradictory information. Was this case tainted by such bias from the beginning? Communities have divided sharply, some seeing Reed as an innocent scapegoat being railroaded by a system protecting its own, while others remain convinced she is genuinely responsible for O'Keefe's death. Meanwhile, the human toll continues to mount. O'Keefe's niece and nephew, who already endured the traumatic loss of their parents, now grieve their guardian uncle with no resolution in sight. These children, already survivors of unimaginable loss, remain caught in the crossfire of a legal battle that shows no signs of resolution. Reed's life and career remain suspended in limbo as she fights for her freedom. Once a respected academic, she now faces the prospect of spending the rest of her life in prison if convicted on the most serious charges. On that frigid January night in 2022, a Boston police officer lost his life. That much is certain. But was he killed by his girlfriend in a drunken accident? Or was he the victim of something more sinister, with Reed herself becoming the second victim of an elaborate cover-up? Even after 2 trials and years of intensive investigation, the fundamental questions remain unanswered. In a case where physical evidence, witness testimony, and investigator conduct have all been called into question, can we ever truly know what happened? The Karen Reed case serves as a disturbing reminder that the path to truth is rarely straight, and the line between justice and injustice sometimes blurs in ways that challenge our fundamental beliefs about how the system works, and who it truly serves. As the second trial continues to unfold, both sides hope for resolution. But in a case this complex and contentious, will any verdict, guilty or not guilty, provide the closure and certainty that so many desperately seek? Or will the truth about what really happened to Officer John O'Keefe that night remain forever hidden in the shadows?
If you enjoy deep dives into true crime, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until next time, friends!